Hey there. Before we begin, take a moment to let the day fall away. Wherever you are, in bed, on a couch, somewhere safe, and still just breathe for a moment. Feel the weight of the blankets, the hum of quiet around you. Tonight, you don't need to think about anything complicated. Tonight, I'll take you somewhere far away, to a place where the wind hums instead of traffic, where houses grow out of the earth, and where the people have spent more than 1,000 years learning how to live with the cold and maybe how to love it. Welcome to Iceland, a land of ice and fire, of silence and endurance, where even the air seems older, wiser, and slower than anywhere else on earth. You can close your eyes if you'd like, it helps. Because this story isn't meant to be watched. It's meant to be felt. You'll hear the wind soon, and when it comes, it won't be angry or sharp. It will move gently, whispering through the plains of snow as if reminding you that not all storms are meant to frighten, some are meant to teach you stillness. You arrive in silence. Not the kind of silence you know from modern life, where even quiet buzzes faintly with electricity, but a silence shaped by snow and ancient wind. A silence so soft, so patient, that even your thoughts feel like they speak too loudly. The night stretches wide here, black and endless, the stars caught in its folds like frost on glass. The land below sleeps beneath a white sheet, and in the distance, a single turf house glows with amber light. It's the kind of glow that says someone's home, even when home is little more than firelight and hope. Snow drifts down, slow and unbothered. Every flake dances its own slow descent, and you realize that in Iceland, even gravity seems to have learned to take its time. You breathe. The air is cold, clean, and older than your language. It stings slightly, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind you you're alive. And in that breath, you begin to understand something that Icelanders have known forever. The cold was never the enemy. It was the teacher. Down the valley, the small house glows stronger. Turf walls blend into the earth, covered in moss, so that from afar it almost disappears. This is what Icelanders built when trees were scarce and winters were long homes made from the land itself, humble but unyielding. Inside, the air would be thick with smoke from the fire, the scent of burning birch, the hum of low conversation, the soft rhythm of wool being spun. A family gathered close, sharing heat and patience. Outside, the snow might rise and fall for days, but inside, time slows to the pace of survival, quiet, careful, human. That's the secret here. The Icelandic winter doesn't ask for strength. It asks for gentleness. You cannot rush through it. You cannot fight it. You can only learn to breathe with it. You take a step. The snow crunches underfoot, soft, deliberate, like a heartbeat in the hush. The sound disappears almost instantly, swallowed by distance. You keep walking toward the glow, each step bringing you closer to warmth and farther from the noise of the world you left behind. There's no rush. Here, nothing rushes. The wind carries whispers from the ocean, even miles away. Salt and ice, memory and distance. You can almost hear it, the echo of sagas once told, the murmurs of people who came here before you, seeking refuge and finding a strange kind of peace instead. They were the first settlers, Norsemen from Norway, weary of kings and war, arriving in small boats with livestock, tools, and the quiet conviction that freedom might be found in solitude. They must have looked at this frozen coast, this treeless, wind-swept island, and wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. And yet, they stayed. They built homes into the hills, lit fires against the darkness, and let the land teach them. The cold stripped away everything unnecessary, leaving only what mattered: warmth, patience, and the stories that carried them through the night. Centuries later, that rhythm still hums in the Icelandic soul. The same stillness, the same quiet defiance, the same respect for nature's pace. You stop for a moment, snow swirling lightly around you. There's no one here but you and the wind. The stars blink softly, as if approving of your pause. In that stillness, Iceland speaks not in words, but in textures. The crunch of snow, the slow heartbeat of the earth beneath, the faint scent of smoke carried miles by the air. It's easy to think of cold as lifeless, but here you feel how alive it really is. The cold breathes. It hums. It shapes everything: the land, the language, even the silence between people. And yet, despite it all, the Icelanders smile easily. They laugh in the snow, swim in geothermal pools while the air freezes around them, tell stories of elves and hidden folk who live in the rocks. They are not immune to hardship, they've simply made peace with it. Maybe that's what the cold teaches, that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to live within it. You reach the door of the turf house now. The handle is made of iron, dark and cold to the touch. For a moment you hesitate, not from fear, but from awe. You can feel warmth on the other side, a warmth that isn't just heat, but belonging. You open the door slowly. Inside, a soft glow fills the small room. Shadows move gently on the walls, shaped by the fire's lazy dance. There's a low wooden table, a pot simmering over coals, and a few sheepskin blankets piled high on a bench. You step in. The door closes behind you with a sigh, shutting out the wind. Someone looks up from the hearth, a woman perhaps, her face lined by time and laughter. She nods, as if she's been expecting you. No words, just a nod. The kind of welcome that needs no language. You sit by the fire. The warmth wraps around you, steady and forgiving. The sound of the storm fades into a distant lullaby. The woman stirs the pot, then glances at you again. "You'll learn," she says softly. "Everyone who stays here does." And you realize she doesn't mean how to survive the winter. She means how to live with it. So breathe. You are safe. You are warm. And you are far from the world of urgency and noise. Outside, Iceland sleeps beneath the snow. Inside, the fire keeps the lesson alive. The cold is not a punishment. It is the pulse of this land, the rhythm of patience, the quiet teacher that humbles the human heart until it finds peace in simplicity. Tonight, you're not escaping the cold. You're learning to love it. And as the wind hums outside your window, you understand why the people of Iceland never call winter cruel. They call it home. Perfect, thank you for confirming. You hear it first. The sound of oars slicing through an ocean that feels more ancient than time itself. The sea doesn't roar tonight. It sighs. Somewhere in that dark sigh are the creaks of longships pushing westward, toward a land no one has seen and everyone has dreamed about. You're on one of them at least. That's how the story wants you to imagine it. Your hands ache from rowing. Your beard has salt frozen into it. And everything you own fits inside a damp wooden chest that also doubles as your pillow. The year is somewhere near 870 AD. Give or take a few decades, records were not the Vikings' strongest hobby. You and your crew have left Norway, a place with too many kings, too many taxes, and far too many relatives who think they deserve your farm. You've heard rumors of an island across the sea, a place of open land and quiet air. An Irish monk once called it Iceland, the land of ice. Everyone laughed. Who would be foolish enough to live on ice? You would, because anything is better than another winter under a king's thumb. The sea stretches endlessly, dark as an old memory. The wind smells of iron and rain, and the gulls sound like arguments you've already lost. Each day blends into the next. The sun, when it appears, is a thin coin on the horizon. The rest of the time, you row in gray mist and wonder if freedom might be another word for getting lost forever. Then, one morning, someone shouts. A shadow rises ahead through the fog. It's not a whale, not a storm cloud, it's land. Black cliffs, white peaks, steam rising faintly where sea meets rock. Iceland. The longship glides into a narrow fjord. The water is calm, almost suspiciously so. You can hear your own breath and the groan of ice somewhere far inland. The world here feels unclaimed, not empty, but untouched. No fortresses, no kings, no neighbors borrowing your axe and never returning it. Just wind and possibility. You step ashore, boots sinking into volcanic sand still warm from the Earth's secret fires. The air tastes different, cleaner, harsher, thinner, like the first breath after confession. Around you, your companions are silent, each lost in private calculations. How much land could this hold? How many winters could this kill? Someone plants an axe into the soil, symbolic and stubborn. Another mutters a prayer to Thor. You, being practical, look around and think, this place needs a roof. What you don't think, what none of you can yet imagine, is that this island will shape generations after you. It will carve patience into your bones, poetry into your tongue, and a particular kind of humor, the dry, weather-beaten sort that only people who have milked a frozen sheep can truly understand. For now, you begin the most difficult part of any great adventure, unpacking. The days that follow are a blur of small victories and larger disappointments. You discover that while Iceland offers space, it does not offer much else. Trees are few, short, stubborn things that cling to life like gossip in a small village. The soil is dark and volcanic, rich but unpredictable. The rivers run cold and clear, full of fish that seem determined to mock you. You build shelters out of driftwood and turf, layering earth on top like frosting on a desperate cake. You set traps, you explore. The air is full of the smell of salt, smoke, and new beginnings. At night, when the temperature drops and the wind begins to sing its long, mournful lullaby, you and your companions huddle around the fire. Someone tells stories about Norway, the kings, the battles, the women with voices louder than thunder. Someone else hums a song that doesn't end because nobody remembers how it's supposed to. It's in these moments, as flames flicker on faces tired and awed, that Iceland begins to claim you. The cold isn't cruel, it's indifferent. It doesn't punish. It simply exists. You learn that if you respect it, if you move slowly and pay attention, it gives back a certain kind of clarity. Every crack of ice, every howl of wind, becomes a language you slowly start to understand. You begin to see beauty where you didn't expect it, in the gleam of frost on the rocks, in the way the clouds roll like oceans above the mountains, in the stillness between snowfalls. You begin to realize that silence here is not empty, it's full. When you wake in the morning, your beard stiff with frost, you smile despite yourself. You found something no warlord could ever give you: peace in hardship. You won't say it aloud, of course. You're Viking. You'd rather die than sound poetic. But still, when the others aren't looking, you pause to listen to the wind. And the wind, old and knowing, seems to whisper, "You belong." Back across the sea, others will follow you. Some will be driven by hope, others by exile, others simply by curiosity, the most dangerous motive of all. They'll bring sheep, cows, horses, and families. They'll bring habits and faiths and the occasional overconfidence. They'll bring sagas waiting to be written. The settlement grows slowly, like lichen on stone. You carve names into the map: Reykjavik, meaning smoky bay, after the steam rising from the ground. It's not much yet, just a few huts, a few hopeful fools pretending they've outsmarted nature, but it's the beginning of something extraordinary. And every night, as you sit by the fire watching the light dance on the walls, you start to feel a quiet respect for the cold that seeps through the cracks. It doesn't yield, but it doesn't kill either. It's simply there, teaching you humility in the most patient way possible. Later, much later, when people ask how Icelanders became so calm, so even-tempered, so oddly at peace with isolation, you'll know the answer. It started here, with you and a handful of dreamers who mistook endurance for rebellion and discovered that sometimes they're the same thing. The land shaped you the way a sculptor shapes stone, slowly, painfully, but beautifully. And though you might still miss the forests of Norway, or the noise of the markets, or even the chaos of war, you'll find a new kind of satisfaction in the whispering wind and the long, patient night. You've reached the end of the world, yes, but it's also the beginning of understanding it. This is how Iceland began, not with conquest, but with curiosity, not with gold, but with grit. And somewhere between the first step on volcanic sand and the first winter storm, the people who came here learned a lesson that would echo through every generation after. They didn't fight the cold. They listened to it, and it taught them everything they needed to survive. You wake before the sun, though that phrase begins to lose meaning here, because the sun no longer behaves like it used to. It rises late, reluctant, dragging its light across the sky for a few hours before giving up altogether. Each day shrinks a little smaller than the last, until daylight is nothing more than a pale rumor. The first winter in Iceland doesn't announce itself with trumpets or snowstorms. It creeps in softly, like an uninvited guest, who starts by taking your chair, then your blanket, then the last of your patience. One morning you notice frost on the inside of the door. A week later, the river stops singing. By the time you realize what's happening, the world has already gone quiet. You remember the stories from Norway, how winter there could be cruel. Yes, but not endless. There were still trees to burn, neighbors to trade with, enough daylight to pretend time was passing. Here, the cold feels eternal. It doesn't simply visit. It moves in, rearranges your habits, your thoughts, your sense of distance. The wind becomes your constant companion. It doesn't rage so much as it sighs low and unending, weaving through the cracks of your walls, tugging at the corners of your resolve. At first you try to ignore it, but it has a way of finding you no matter how quietly you sit. Inside your small turf house, the days blur. Smoke from the fire crawls along the ceiling, and the air smells of damp wool, salt meat, and resignation. You keep a small lamp burning even when you sleep, not because it helps you see, but because darkness feels too absolute. You count your supplies again and again, though the numbers never change. You still have fish, a few sacks of barley, some dried meat, and a growing appreciation for how unappetizing survival can be. You used to joke that Viking stomachs were made of iron. You no longer find that funny. At night, you lie awake and listen to the earth shifting beneath its blanket of snow. The cold creaks like an old man settling into bed. Somewhere in the distance, a horse exhales, a reminder that you are not alone in enduring this season. And then comes the first real storm. It starts as a whisper, just wind brushing across the hills. But by nightfall, it becomes a presence. The air itself thickens. Snow presses against the roof, hissing through the thatch. The door shudders, as if something outside wants in. You pile stones against it and sit close to the fire, pretending the noise is music, pretending you are brave. The world shrinks to the circle of orange light around you. Everything beyond that glow might as well be another planet. You try to keep busy. You mend nets that won't see the sea again until spring. You carve small figurines from bone, half idols, half company. You talk aloud, mostly to yourself, sometimes to the house, sometimes to the cold. It never answers, but it always listens. Days turn into weeks, and you stop counting them. Time here doesn't move forward. It deepens. Every breath feels older than the last. There's humor in it, in a strange way, the kind born of exhaustion and frostbite. You catch yourself chuckling when your soup freezes before you finish it. You mutter to the window, "Well played, winter." You begin to suspect the cold has a personality, dry, mischievous, unbothered. It isn't trying to kill you. It's trying to teach you manners. Outside, the snow buries everything. The tools you left by the wall disappear overnight. The path to the river vanishes. Even your memories of color begin to fade. The world becomes shades of gray and thought. You start to miss the smell of soil, the sound of rain that falls instead of freezes. And yet, amid the monotony, something changes in you. You stop expecting comfort. You start noticing small mercies instead. The way the smoke curls evenly today. The way the fire catches quickly after 3 tries instead of 5. The way the silence feels less like an absence and more like a blanket. You begin to adapt. You learn to move slower, to conserve heat, to listen before acting. You learn that there is wisdom in doing less. The cold teaches economy not just of motion, but of emotion. Every smile, every word, every gesture costs energy, so you start spending them wisely. You learn to sit with yourself, to make peace with your own thoughts. You learn that solitude isn't the same as loneliness. It's a kind of conversation with the world around you. Sometimes when the wind softens for an hour, you step outside. The night sky stretches above you like a cathedral. Stars burn so fiercely in the thin air that you almost forget they're millions of years away. You catch yourself whispering thank you to no one in particular. The snow under your boots glows faintly in starlight. It's so quiet you can hear your heartbeat echo off the hills. For a moment, The cold doesn't feel like opposition, it feels like communion. That's when you realize what the island has been trying to tell you all along. Survival here isn't about strength, it's about rhythm. You can't overpower the cold any more than you can argue with gravity. You can only learn to move in time with it, to breathe when it breathes, to rest when it sleeps. You return to the house with numb fingers and a strange calm in your chest. The fire greets you like an old friend who never left. You sit beside it, thawing slowly, smiling at nothing. Maybe this is what humility feels like, not defeat, but acceptance. Outside, the storm gathers again. But this time, you're not afraid. You wrap yourself in furs, stretch out beside the fire, and listen to the wind tell its endless story. You don't understand the words yet, but you know they're not meant to harm. In time, you'll learn them all. Because every island, every winter, every silence is a kind of teacher. And this endless, echoing dark is your first lesson. By the second winter, you begin to understand that in Iceland, a good roof is not a luxury. It's theology. You used to think of a house as a thing you built. Walls, beams, pride. Here, you learn that a house is something you bargain with. You bargain with wind, with water, with time itself. You learn to stoop a little lower, to live a little nearer the earth that grudgingly keeps you warm. The first shelters, those desperate heaps of driftwood and sod, have collapsed by now. Too much wind, too much wishful thinking. So you start again. You dig down instead of up. You carve into the hill, as if asking permission. You cut blocks of turf, thick and heavy, stacking them one over another until the house begins to resemble a sleeping mound, part dwelling, part apology. From a distance, the new home looks less like a building and more like a memory. Grass covers the roof, moss creeps along the walls, and sheep graze absent-mindedly on the very ceiling you sleep beneath. You could vanish here, and the land would barely notice. That's exactly the point. Inside, the air smells of damp earth and smoke. The walls breathe. They weep a little in the thaw, then harden again when frost returns. You hang fish to dry in the rafters, where the smoke curls and paints everything the color of persistence. There's barely enough space to stand upright, but plenty of room to sit, to wait, to exist quietly. You light an oil lamp, its flame small and serious. It flickers against the turf, turning the room into a shifting cave of gold and brown. You realize the light isn't there to brighten anything. It's there to remind you that you're still here. The floor is uneven. The ceiling drips sometimes. And yet, somehow, you begin to love it. This isn't a palace. It's a pact. You keep me warm. You whisper to the walls, and I'll stay humble. Life inside a turf house moves at the speed of firewood. Every task has its own rhythm. Grind the grain, feed the animals, stir the soup, mend the wool. Nothing is urgent, because everything is essential. You don't rush survival, you tend it. The days outside may be blinding with snow or gray with endless drizzle, but inside, the world has its own weather, warm where the fire breathes, cool near the door, fragrant with smoke and stories. You start to recognize the different dialects of creaks and sighs the walls make. You learn that when the wind howls through the chimney, it's only checking if you're paying attention. Sometimes, when the storm is loud enough to drown out thought, someone begins to tell a story. Maybe it's about a farmer who tricked a troll, Maybe it's about a horse that could fly. Maybe it's about nothing at all, just the sound of a voice so you can remember what voices sound like. The children, if there are any, listen wide-eyed. The adults pretend not to, because adults are supposed to know these stories already. But secretly, everyone leans a little closer to the fire. Because here, warmth is shared in words as much as in heat. When laughter comes, it's quiet but genuine. No one here wastes energy on roaring amusement. Smiles are small, contained, like embers that never quite go out. You learn that happiness doesn't have to be loud to be real. You grow used to the intimacy of this life. There are no hallways, no private corners, no space to hide moods. Everyone's breath, everyone's thoughts, live together in this earthen room. You sleep side by side, sometimes with the animals in the adjoining stall, because a cow's body is worth more heat than any philosophy. The steady rhythm of their breathing fills the house at night, and you find it strangely comforting. The warmth, the smell, the slow pulse of shared survival, none of it is elegant, but all of it is honest. Outside, the wind claws at the hills, but inside, the world feels cocooned, safe in its smallness. You begin to understand the peculiar Icelandic genius for patience. In a place where everything is temporary light, warmth, even hope, you learn to treasure the temporary instead of chasing the permanent. Every morning, when you push open the heavy turf door and step into the blue half-light, you feel like the earth itself is exhaling you. Steam rises from the ground, mingling with your breath. The sky seems close enough to touch, but you don't bother. You've learned to let things be unreachable. You start to see beauty in the most functional things. A dry stack of turf bricks, a pot that hasn't cracked, a window that holds its frost pattern like lace. When the rare sunshine filters through the smoke hole, it feels like a blessing, not a guarantee. There's humor in this too, the quiet, bone-dry kind that survives even when everything else freezes. You and your neighbors invent sayings like, "If it doesn't leak, it's not finished," and smoke is good company if you breathe politely. You laugh at the absurdity of using the same shovel for digging graves and dinner pits, because in winter, every tool has to do double duty. You tease the youngest among you for complaining about the draft, telling them the wind is only visiting. The wind, apparently, has a large family. These small jokes become lifelines. They don't make the days shorter or the nights warmer, but they remind you that humor, like fire, doesn't need abundance to survive. It just needs someone to feed it occasionally. In the heart of the turf house, a new rhythm develops. Days are measured not by clocks, but by chores. The morning begins when the first spark catches in the hearth. Noon arrives when someone remembers to stir the stew. Evening falls when the oil runs low, and conversation turns into humming. The cold no longer feels like an intruder. It's become part of the household routine, an invisible roommate who insists on open windows and never says thank you. You grumble, but secretly you admire its consistency. And slowly, without noticing, the house begins to change you. It teaches you the value of low ceilings and high endurance. It teaches you that light can be coaxed out of the smallest flame, and comfort can be woven out of habit. It teaches you that sometimes the best architecture is humility made visible. One night, as the wind pauses between storms, you sit by the fire and listen to the faint crackle of the turf settling. The glow paints everything in shades of honey and smoke. You look around at this small room, the uneven floor, the patched walls, the shadows that move like old friends, and you realize something unexpected. You're content. Not joyful, not triumphant, just quietly, profoundly content. You think of the kings back in Norway, their stone halls echoing with feasts and fights, and you feel no envy. Your palace is made of earth and patience, and it keeps its promises. You smile to yourself, half amused, half reverent. They didn't fight the cold, you murmur softly, tasting the truth of it. They learned its rhythm. The wind outside stirs again, as if it heard you and approves. The walls breathe in, the fire sighs out. And for a fleeting moment, everything, house, land, and heart, moves to the same slow, steady beat. You don't notice the moment resilience arrives. It doesn't kick down the door or announce itself with a speech. It comes in quietly, on slow boots, carrying a bundle of ordinary tasks. It looks like someone adding one more turf brick to the windward wall. It looks like a pot of soup stretched one more night. It sounds like laughter that doesn't waste breath, and silence that doesn't waste time. By the third winter, you start to realize that your life no longer revolves around avoiding hardship. It revolves around arranging with it. The cold is not your rival, it's your calendar. The wind is not your punishment, it's your planner. You begin to measure days, not by how much you conquered, but by how well you listened to the sky, to the animals, to each other. Resilience here is not dramatic. It has no theme music. It's a way of holding yourself so the wind slides past your shoulders instead of knocking you flat. It's the knack of choosing when to move and when to stay still. It's admitting that the weather will always win the argument, and then answering politely anyway. Understood. We'll milk at dawn. You learn to value the long view. The first winter was a test. The second winter was a bargain. The third becomes a rhythm. The steps of it are unglamorous and perfect. Check the roof. Check the animals. Check the fire. Check on the neighbor who pretends they don't need anyone. The neighbor checks on you, even more stubbornly. No one calls this kindness. You simply call it living through February. When the wind drops to a whisper, you step outside and feel the house exhale you into the half-light. You look across the valley and see smoke curling from other turf roofs, small and steady, like signatures at the bottom of the day. Each plume says the same thing in a different handwriting. Still here. You smile at that, at the unassuming glory of endurance that doesn't need applause. Inside, your habits become heirlooms. The way you stack wood, the way you mend a tear without wasting thread, the exact tilt of the lamp wick so it burns clean. These are not tricks. They are small philosophies. You start teaching them without noticing. A child copies your hands. A guest copies your patience. Even the dog learns the art of not hurrying. You have learned the weather's jokes. Too dry, reliable, and older than the hills. When the door rattles all night and the morning arrives as a blue bruise, you mutter, "Pleasure to see you again," to the gale, and it seems to approve. The humor here is not a shield. It's a hinge, the thing that lets the door swing through another season without breaking. And somewhere in the bone-deep quiet that only winter understands, your thoughts change shape. Pride stops meaning victory and starts meaning grace. Strength stops meaning noise and starts meaning balance. Safety stops meaning walls and starts meaning neighbors. You catch yourself, one cold morning thinking, we are poorer alone than the wind is rich. The idea settles like a stone in your pocket, useful, comforting, easy to forget until you need it. When a storm rolls over the valley like a dark animal, there's no heroism in braving it. Heroism is pulling the latch from the inside, saving the lamp oil, and telling a story that lasts exactly as long as the squall. It is an art measuring a tale by weather. You find that the old stories fit this place better than new ones. Sagas with their quiet thunder, their stubborn kindness, their recognition that fate is not a cliff, but a coast, difficult, navigable, seen best by those who keep rowing. Sometimes you remember the first days, when you believed you could tame this land. Now you laugh at that softly, so as not to wake the winds. You didn't tame anything. You learned the rhythm. You learned that life here is a dance where the partner leads, and you still get credit for the grace. Resilience becomes visible in the smallest motions. The way someone sets a bowl down on the table gently, as if the bowl has been through enough. The way a child opens the door a hand's breadth at a time, making space for the weather to join the room without swallowing it. The way everyone pauses, at almost the same moment each evening, to listen. Is that the storm ending, or only changing masks? These gestures are choreography taught by the island itself. Repeatable, beautiful, anonymous. You used to think of luck as a thing that lands on you. Here, luck is a skill. It's the patience to wait for a good hour to travel between houses. It's the wisdom to cook one thing well instead of three things quickly. It's the humility to ask, have you enough? And the grace to answer, today, yes. In that exchange, the village holds. There are rituals for this endurance. None of them are grand. One is the evening inventory, the shared certainty that spoons are in their place. The kettle hangs true. The embers are banked like sleeping birds. Another ritual is the night's first silence. Right after the last sentence is spoken and right before anyone moves. That silence says, we made it to this moment. It always says more than the spoken words. When cracks appear in the turf wall, no one scolds the wall for living. You press new sod into the gap. You pat it like a shoulder, and you praise it for trying. The house is not your possession, it's your companion. You notice that you've started talking to it. Hold fast, old friend, and that it has never once failed to answer in the creak of thaw or the sigh of settling. On certain nights, when the sky clears and the stars throw their cold honey, you stand outside until your eyelashes bead with frost. The constellations look closer, as if the world has narrowed to the size of understanding. You feel a presence that isn't quite solitude and isn't quite company. The word for it hasn't been invented yet. You decide to let that be all right. Not every good thing needs a name to keep it warm. Then there's the thaw, always beginning as rumor, never arriving on schedule. The snow loosens its grip, the streams clear their throats, and the valley changes color like a bruise healing. In the first dripping hours, everyone walks a little awkwardly, like new foals learning the geometry of legs. You would think relief would be loud, but it isn't. It's the quiet of discovering that your tools survived. Your hands remember. Your people are still here. Spring is a workshop where resilience is sharpened. You repair what the wind edited, you thank what endured. You mourn what didn't, and you do it without ceremony. Because grief here is honest and pared down, like everything else. A fence post is replaced. A name is spoken softly, The work continues, which is not indifference, but love expressed in the most practical grammar. You begin to see how the first winters did more than thin provisions. They thickened character. They taught you to read a sky without poetry, to carry a day without complaint, to measure success in warm feet and unspilled soup. The lessons were not subtle, but they were thorough. They have a way of sticking to the ribs, and in that learning, something communal ripens. You and yours have become a we without announcing it. Decisions are made after listening. Help is offered before asked. Disagreements are postponed until the weather is less fragile. No one believes that bravery is loud. Bravery is going out early to clear the drift from your neighbor's door, so they can pretend they did it themselves. Bravery is leaving the last bowl for the person who will come late. Bravery is sleeping when you can, because tomorrow the wind will want a conversation. Once, when you were younger in this land, you believed resilience was a kind of armor. Now you know better. It's a skin, living, porous, mending while you move. It lets the world in just enough to learn from it, and keeps just enough out to keep your warmth. It's not invincibility, it's compatibility. On a long blue evening, you sit with the old ones who've forgotten more winters than you've survived. They do not give speeches. They teach by posture, by the way they hold a spoon, the way they listen, all the way to the end of the wind. You ask what they think the cold wants from people. One shrugs and says, "Attention." Another adds, "Patience." A third smiles without teeth and says, "Company." You realize each of them is right, and none of them are finished. That night, as you bank the fire and smooth the sleeping furs, you feel the island's lesson settle into a single sentence that is not a victory cry and not a surrender. It's simple, like the best truths are. You didn't fight the cold. You learned its rhythm. You whisper it to the room, not because the walls need reminding, but because you do. The words calm your breath. The house seems to breathe with you. Outside, the wind changes key barely, but you can hear it now, after all these months of listening. Morning comes without drama. Clouds lean on the hills. A raven signs its name across the field. You rise and do the next necessary thing. This is not a story about triumph. It's a story about continuity, about the grace of not quitting, about the quiet magnificence of human beings who decided that the edge of the world was as good a place as any to practice being gentle. And if someone asks, years from now, where the famed Icelandic steadiness came from, this calm, this clarity, this odd way of meeting catastrophe with a patient nod, you'll know the answer. It was born under turf and smoke and long, dark hours. It was midwifed by wind. It learned to walk by leaning into weather. It found its voice in small rooms and old stories in hands that never hurried. It wears no medals, keeps no records, and leaves its best work unnamed. But you will recognize it, always, by the way it turns a storm into a schedule, hunger into sharing, and winter into a teacher. You bank the fire once more and listen to the house settle. The day will ask for the usual, the chores, the errands, the courtesy owed to sky and neighbor. You feel ready in the only way that matters here. Not invincible, but in tune. Somewhere beyond the ridge, another roof exhales a plume of smoke. Still here. You nod to it, as if to a companion across a long table. Still here. And that is how resilience is born in this place. Not from defiance, but from accord. from the soft insistence of people who have decided to hold fast and hold gently at the same time. Outside, the wind begins a new paragraph. Inside, you turn the page. By the time the third winter settles in, the island no longer feels like an adversary. It feels like an elder relative, still gruff, still moody, but someone you've learned how to live with. The cold remains, of course. It always will. But now you know its habits, its temper, its secret tenderness. You've learned that surviving in Iceland isn't about hardening yourself. It's about finding warmth in the spaces where warmth still dares to exist. And that warmth, you realize, isn't just in the fire. It's in the fellowship that gathers around it. Inside the turf houses, the nights stretch long and slow, the kind of nights that make even the clocks yawn. Outside, the wind plays its endless song, shaking at the door. But inside, the air hums with life. A low, golden fire glows in the hearth, flickering against faces gathered close. The light clings to wool and hair, paints the smoke in ribbons that twist up toward the roof hole. The room smells of peat, soup, and the faint sweetness of drying fish. Here, warmth is not taken for granted. It's a ritual, a ceremony repeated each evening with reverent precision. The fire is coaxed awake, not struck into being. The soup is stirred slowly, so its steam rises in gratitude. Someone adds another log sparingly, like an offering, and you, sitting among them, feel the strange comfort of collective care. No one speaks loudly. Voices here know better than to shout. They move gently, as if not to disturb the quiet miracle of heat. The cold presses against the walls, curious but uninvited. You can almost hear it breathing out there, frustrated, unable to enter. Around the fire, the hierarchy of survival disappears. The farmer, the child, the guest, the widow all sit shoulder to shoulder in the same circle of light. In that small orbit, the world outside loses its teeth. You ladle soup from the pot thick, simple, humble. It's mostly broth and root vegetables, with a few lucky scraps of meat floating like dreams. It doesn't taste of luxury, but it tastes of enough. Everyone eats slowly, grateful in silence. No one ever eats alone in winter. Even hunger, in Iceland, prefers company. When the bowls are empty and the fire has found its steady rhythm, someone begins to hum. The melody is old, older than memory, perhaps borrowed from the wind itself. Another voice joins in, then another. There are no instruments, just human breath and harmony. It's not a performance, it's a survival instinct, a way to remind the body that it still contains music. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sound wash through you. It's quiet but strong, like warmth translated into sound. Outside, the snow falls harder. Inside, you find that laughter has its own temperature, soft, glowing, contagious. Someone tells a small joke about the wind getting lost on its way to Norway. Someone else snorts, trying not to laugh too loud. Even the sheep in the adjoining stall seem to listen, as if the humor belongs to them too. These gatherings are not grand. They are nightly and necessary. Icelandic warmth is democratic. It belongs to whoever needs it most at that moment. Sometimes a neighbor from a nearby farm trudges through knee-deep snow just to share an evening's fire. They arrive half-frozen, carrying a loaf of rye bread wrapped in wool, and the entire house brightens at the sight. You make space without needing to discuss it. There is always space for one more soul in the circle. This habit, the gathering, the soup, the song becomes the pulse of winter life. It's how people here keep from drifting into the silence that waits beyond the door. You learn to read faces by firelight. The way the glow softens hard expressions, the way it turns every eye into a mirror of gold. You realize that the fire doesn't just warm bodies, it warms stories. The elders, of course, are the keepers of those stories. When the night deepens and the flames shrink to coals, someone begins one. The old voice cracks a little, but that only adds to its authority. It's never a formal announcement. No one says, "Now I shall tell a saga." It begins more casually, as all great things do. "Did I ever tell you about the time?" The children perk up, the adults pretend not to, and the room slowly tilts toward the tale. It might be a story of sea voyages, or feuds, or the time someone's grandmother wrestled a ghost out of her kitchen. It might be a tale of heroes who spoke too proudly, or farmers who outwitted trolls. But beneath the humor and the exaggeration, you can feel something deeper, the weight of memory. The story stretches out like a map, guiding the listeners not through geography but through identity. It says, "We have been here before. We have survived before. You are part of this now." The storyteller's voice rises and falls like the wind, weaving suspense and laughter and wisdom into one thread. The fire punctuates it with small pops, as though the flames themselves are listening. After a while, you begin to understand that these evenings are not just pastime, they are practice. Each story, each song, each shared silence is a rehearsal for endurance. The cold may rule the land, but the fire rules the mind. It gives shape to the hours, warmth to the imagination. It becomes the true hearth, not just of the house, but of the spirit. You find yourself contributing timidly at first, a memory, a proverb, a small observation about how snow always seems to fall sideways here. The others listen with the same attention they give the old stories. You realize that here, storytelling isn't a performance. It's participation. And when laughter follows gentle, approving, you feel a strange kind of belonging take root. Not the belonging of citizenship or blood, but of shared flame. By the time the fire has burned low and the last embers glow like sleeping eyes, you feel warmer than you thought possible. Not because the air is warm, it isn't, but because the cold has been held at bay by something older, stronger, more human. Fellowship. It occurs to you that this is how civilizations survive, not by might, but by company, not by wealth, but by warmth shared without keeping score. As you drift toward sleep, the last sound you hear is the crackle of the fire and a voice finishing an unfinished story. And that's why, when the wind speaks, we always answer. The voice fades. The house sighs. The world outside continues its frozen breathing, patient as always. You close your eyes and think, perhaps warmth was never meant to defeat the cold, only to remind us that we still deserve it. After a while, you notice that the stories told around the fire begin to grow larger than the room itself. They stretch their arms through the rafters and out into the snow, as though the night were a page and the voices were ink. Every settlement on the island keeps such a page. Every family adds a line. You can almost hear them traveling these words, crossing valleys where no light lives, carried by wind, memorized by children, retold by elders, until the details become polished from use. What began as a simple evening pastime becomes something else entirely, a map made of language. Iceland is being written, one winter at a time. It happens quietly. There is no decree, No royal library, no scholar announcing a movement, just people refusing to let silence have the final word. The sagas are born in the same way as warmth, through necessity and repetition. When there is nothing left to build with but words, you build with words. You learn the rhythm of these tales. They begin without ceremony. There was a man named, and before you know it, you are following him across fjords and feuds, watching as he trades insults sharper than swords, as he swears vengeance, as he dies, usually inconveniently, and as his children carry the quarrel into another century. The sagas are not polite stories. They are blunt, dry, unflinching. They taste like the land that birthed them, hard, spare, honest. Someone once said that Icelanders wrote their history because there was nothing else to do in winter. You smile at the half-truth of that. Yes, the dark months gave them time, but more than that, the dark gave them urgency. The cold could steal your breath, your crops, your cattle, but it could not steal a story that had already been spoken aloud. Once released into the air, a tale had the stubbornness of smoke. It would find another chimney. So you tell them, night after night, tales of warriors who outlived their luck, tales of women whose patience lasted longer than the glaciers, tales where the moral is rarely clean, because life isn't. You tell them to remember that you were here, that you mattered, that the wind may erase footprints but never voices. And the beautiful irony is that these stories born from isolation become Iceland's invitation to the world. Centuries later, when parchment replaces memory and monks begin to write by the glow of whale oil lamps, they will copy down the old words in neat, deliberate strokes. They will preserve the humor, the fatalism, the exact tone of a people who learned that endurance can be art. The Icelandic saga, the sagas of the Icelanders, will travel farther than any Viking ship ever managed, and they will outlast every king who ignored them. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight, it's just you, the fire, and a voice that refuses to go quiet. The storyteller leans forward, eyes bright in the half-light, and begins again. There was a man named. You lean closer. The sentence is a door opening. You step through. Each saga has its own weather. Some storm with battle. Some drift like snow, settling on the small human details. How someone looked at someone else too long. How pride made a feast go cold. How forgiveness took 3 generations to thaw. Listening to them, you realize that these people, their passions, their mistakes are still your neighbors. The landscape may have changed, but the temperature of the heart hasn't. You begin to see how the sagas taught Icelanders to think in storylines instead of seasons. A storm becomes a chapter. A thaw becomes a resolution. Even misfortune gains structure. When everything is fleeting sunlight, harvests, hope narrative is a kind of permanence. It says, this happened. It mattered. The humor inside these tales is sharp and dry, a warmth disguised as irony. A hero might say, after losing half his men, it could have gone worse. That sentence is a national anthem disguised as understatement. You learn to recognize that tone, the refusal to dramatize despair, the quiet wink at catastrophe. It's the same humor that keeps soup ladles stirring when the larder is nearly empty. Storytelling here isn't escape. It's endurance in its most elegant form. A good story distracts you from the cold for an hour. A great one teaches you how to bear it forever. Sometimes, during a pause, you notice the silence between stories. It isn't empty, it hums with thought. The listeners stare into the fire, each replaying the tale in private, adjusting it slightly, preparing to tell it again someday with a few improvements. That's how sagas evolve, through countless retellings polished by breath. The storytellers are not possessive. They hand the story to the next voice like a torch. You try your own hand at it one night. Your tale is small, a scrap about the fox that keeps stealing from your traps. You embellish, of course, turning the fox into a trickster spirit, giving it dialogue, giving yourself dignity. The room chuckles. Someone adds a line. Before you know it, your fox has joined the island's informal mythology. You feel a flicker of pride, the soft, sustainable kind that comes from being woven into something larger than yourself. That's how Iceland works. Nothing stands alone, not even stories. They borrow warmth from one another. You start to understand why Icelandic words sound like spells. They are spells spoken first against hunger, then against forgetfulness. The consonants carry weather in them. The vowels taste of smoke and sea. When you speak them, you feel the shape of the island in your mouth. Later, centuries later, outsiders will marvel that a place so cold produced literature so alive. But you know the reason. The cold did not stifle imagination, it disciplined it. It forced every sentence to earn its heat. And perhaps that's the real gift of the sagas. They teach that even memory can be communal fire. Each retelling is a log placed on it. Each listener, a spark. In a world that freezes everything it touches, words alone remain warm. You lie back, eyes half closed, and let the storyteller's voice blur into the crackle of the hearth. The names and deeds fold into dream. Somewhere in that haze, you sense the thread connecting you to every voice that ever spoke through this dark. The monks copying ink by candlelight, the fisherman humming to himself at sea, the grandmother retelling the same ghost story to keep a child asleep. They are all here, gathered in the invisible circle that Icelanders have kept alive for 1,000 years. The cold presses in at the door, patient as ever, but it cannot cross the threshold of language. Because tonight, as on every winter night, the island's truest hearth burns not in the fire pit, but in the story still being told. There's another kind of story being told in Icelandic homes, one without words. You see it in the hands. When conversation pauses, when the last story has been folded back into silence, the hands keep moving. They twist, loop, and pull. The firelight catches the motion, and it looks almost like spell work. In a way, it is. Because in this land, warmth has always been less of a comfort and more of a craft. Sheep are the quiet heroes of this story. They stand outside in the snow, round and resigned, their wool thick enough to make them look like moving clouds with opinions. Icelanders call them kind, which feels fitting, because they are exactly that kind enough to live, kind enough to share what keeps them alive. You learn quickly that sheep are not just livestock here. They are co-authors of civilization. Every roof, every coat, every blanket owes its existence to the sheep's patience. You shear, you spin, you knit, and in doing so, you turn landscape into clothing. You take something cold and stubborn and make it soft and human. The wool smells faintly of the fields, even after washing. It carries with it a reminder of grass that slept under snow, of wind that never stopped moving. You hold a strand in your fingers and it feels like continuity itself, tough, forgiving, endless. Knitting begins as utility, but it becomes meditation. Each stitch is a heartbeat. Each row is a small act of faith. The rhythm slows your thoughts until your breathing matches it. The hands know what to do long before the mind catches up. The pattern is repetition, but the repetition is peace. You watch an old woman by the fire, her needles clicking softly, her eyes half closed. The motion looks effortless, but you can sense the discipline in it. She isn't creating a garment. She's maintaining a lineage. Every generation adds a new twist to the pattern, a signature that might survive the century. There's humor in it, too. If a man brags too much, someone always says, "We'll see how he knits in a storm," which, of course, means that patience outlasts pride. Sometimes, during a lull in conversation, you look around the room and realize that everyone is working at something: knitting, mending nets, carving, braiding rope. The house becomes a small orchestra of gentle industriousness. The sound of survival is not the roar of engines or hammers. It's the steady whisper of people refusing to be idle. No one rushes. You can't rush warmth. You can only coax it into being, one stitch at a time. The Icelandic sweater, the lopapisa, doesn't exist yet in your era, but its ancestors are here, growing on the needles and shoulders of these patient hands. Thick, circular, designed not for fashion but for forgiveness. The pattern forms naturally from need, looser near the neck for breath, tighter at the wrist to keep the heat in. Beauty arrives accidentally, like frost flowers on a window pane. You learn to respect this quiet artistry. Every finished sock or mitten carries a story: who it was made for, which winter it survived, which patch of wool came from which sheep. The garments become diaries worn against the skin. Sometimes the wool runs short. Then creativity steps in. Old garments are unraveled and reborn. You can trace an entire household's history through the yarn: a child's sweater turned into a glove turned into a scarf finally lining the bottom of a shoe. Nothing here truly dies. It just finds a smaller purpose. You begin to understand that in Iceland, resilience and resourcefulness are synonyms. Knitting circles form naturally, without invitation. Someone brings wool, another brings gossip, and soon the room hums with stories that have nothing to do with heroes or ghosts, just the familiar absurdities of life. Who's courting whom? Whose sheep got lost again? Whose bread turned out heavier than stone? The laughter is gentle, affectionate. It's not the loud, careless kind. It's the sort that keeps the heart supple. You realize that humor here isn't escape. It's lubrication for endurance. It keeps the gears of community turning smoothly through long months of confinement. You take up your own needles. At first, the yarn tangles hopelessly. You curse under your breath, and someone beside you smiles, fixing your mistake without comment. The silence between you is comfortable, the way silence should be between people who have learned that conversation isn't measured in words. After a while, you find your rhythm. The pattern appears slow, patient, inevitable. You feel a small, secret pride. You're not just keeping warm, you're participating in an ancient collaboration between human will and sheep generosity. Outside, the wind tests the walls again. Inside, you answer with your own pattern. Click, pull, breathe. You realize something profound and absurd at once. Maybe civilization was invented so people could have something to knit indoors. As the season deepens, the pile of finished garments grows. Sweaters stacked like promises. Mittens waiting for smaller hands. Socks with mismatched stripes, because perfection has never been the Icelandic goal, only persistence. You watch the younger ones learning, fingers awkward but eager. Their laughter fills the room, and you feel the future weaving itself right there, tangible, practical, beautiful. In a world where nature keeps testing humanity's resolve, these small acts of creation are defiance disguised as domesticity. Every stitch is a refusal to yield. Every pattern says, "We are still here. We are still warm." The firelight glows on the wool, turning it to liquid gold. Someone yawns. The room smells of peat and patience. Outside, the night stretches on forever, but it no longer feels like an adversary. The cold can have the mountains and the fields. In here, you've built your own weather. When you lay down your knitting and close your eyes, you think not for the first time that warmth doesn't come from temperature. It comes from rhythm, from repetition, from the stubborn belief that what your hands make can change how the night feels. You fall asleep to the sound of needles still moving, a lullaby of quiet defiance. And when the dream comes, it looks like wool, soft, endless, and kind. At some point you notice that the talking stops. Not abruptly, no one decides it, but gradually, like snow settling after a storm. One story ends, no one begins the next, and the room exhales into stillness. The fire keeps its own small language: crack, sigh, flutter. A spoon bumps against a bowl. A sheep shifts in the adjoining stall. Then even those sounds fade until there is nothing left but breathing. You sit inside that quiet, and for a moment you're not sure what to do with it. In other places, silence feels awkward, like a question that needs answering. Here, it feels finished, complete. The Icelanders treat it the way monks treat prayer. Not a gap between things, but the thing itself. Outside, the wind combs the hills, changing pitch every few heartbeats. It isn't lonely, it's conversational. The house listens, creaking back now and then in acknowledgement. You begin to understand why people here rarely waste words. The land does most of the talking. You remember your first winter, how silence frightened you. Back then it felt like an abyss, waiting to swallow thought. Now it feels like a companion with good manners, always nearby, never demanding attention. When you lie awake at night, you can hear it moving through the rafters, settling around you like another blanket. Silence, you realize, has its own warmth. It's not the heat of the fire or the comfort of wool. It's the temperature of peace. The mind, when it stops flailing for noise, generates its own small ember. During the short gray days, people work quietly. The chores have become a choreography of familiarity. Grind, carry, mend, feed. No one narrates them. They simply unfold. You start to notice that the absence of chatter makes every gesture precise. When someone passes a bowl or lifts a log, it's done with the grace of long practice. The body speaks fluently enough, the mouth can rest. Children learn this language early. They know when silence means listen, when it means don't worry, and when it simply means we are together. They grow up understanding that affection can be transmitted through proximity. In a place this small, you don't always need sentences. You need presence. Occasionally, someone breaks the hush with a single remark, perhaps about the way the light fell across the snow that morning, or how the bread rose better today. The comment drifts through the room like a spark and then fades, satisfied. Conversation here isn't a river, it's a handful of stones skipping across a pond. The water, quiet, patient, remains the real subject. You begin to hear patterns in the quiet, the faint hum of the lamp, the steady rhythm of knitting, the soft pop of turf drying above the fire. It's a music built from restraint, a composition that rewards listening. Once you tune in, you wonder how you ever endured noise. The cold outside sharpens everything, even sound. When you step out at night, the air rings like glass. A single cough travels half a mile. The crunch of snow underfoot sounds indecently loud. You find yourself whispering, though there's no one to wake. Your breath rises in little clouds that vanish before they can reach the stars. You realize that the whole island breathes like this: exhale, vanish, repeat. Far off, an aurora unfurls across the horizon, silent yet theatrical. Green silk over black velvet. No drum roll, no applause. Just the steady hum of the universe minding its own business. You watch until your eyes sting from the cold, then laugh softly to yourself. In Iceland, even miracles know how to behave. You go back inside, close the door, and the house greets you with its usual murmur. The silence here feels different from the silence outside. Out there it's cosmic. In here it's domestic. One reminds you of how small you are, the other of how lucky. Between the two, life balances neatly. There are practical benefits to quiet. Words cost breath, and breath makes condensation, and condensation turns to frost. Talking too much can literally freeze your walls. The ancestors understood this instinctively. They let their minds fill the air instead of their voices. That's why, centuries later, Icelanders write so much poetry. They've been thinking in verses for generations before anyone bothered to write them down. You notice that when someone finally does speak, every word carries weight. A sentence may be short, but it's honed like a tool that has seen many winters. Even jokes here are efficient. One line, one smirk, no echoes. You find yourself adopting the same economy. Your thoughts slow down. Your sentences grow shorter, truer. Silence edits you into honesty. Sometimes you wonder whether the land itself teaches this restraint. The snow never brags, it simply falls. The lava fields don't demand attention, they wait. Even the sea seems to breathe in long, thoughtful pauses. To live here is to take your cues from elements that know the value of stillness. There's another kind of quiet that arrives only after midnight, when even the fire sleeps, the coals dim to a pulse, the room cools, and you lie beneath heavy blankets listening to the house settle. You can hear your heartbeat clearly, slow and steady, syncing with the faint hiss of snow against the door. In that dark, you understand something profound and absurd. Silence is the oldest lullaby. You think of the ancestors who lay in this same dark centuries before you, listening to the same wind, breathing the same rhythm. Their names are gone, but their quiet remains. It's a form of inheritance that requires no parchment, only ears. You smile at the thought. Even history, it turns out, whispers. In the days that follow, you begin to treat quiet the way some people treat religion, with reverence, but also with humor. When a visitor from another valley talks too loudly, someone gently says, "The wind can hear you, and it likes to answer." Everyone laughs softly. The visitor lowers his voice. Lesson delivered. There's a practical philosophy behind the joke. If you listen long enough, the world reveals what you need to know. The cracking ice tells you when the river is safe. The tone of the wind tells you whether a storm is bluffing. Silence is not absence, it's information rendered subtle. This attentiveness shapes the Icelandic temperament. The people here are famously calm, and now you see why. Living in constant conversation with weather teaches you patience. You can't rush wind, you can only wait for it to finish its sentence. One evening you sit alone by the fire, the others already asleep. The lamp flickers, making the shadows dance lazily across the walls. You close your eyes and listen. The quiet hums like a deep instrument, resonating somewhere behind your ribs. You realize you've grown fond of this sound, this company that never interrupts. You whisper, without meaning to, "Thank you." The house creaks in reply. In that moment, you understand why Icelanders have a word for the comfort of companionship without conversation. Samlindi, a harmony of being together. It doesn't require speech, it requires understanding. The silence between people who trust each other is warmer than 1,000 fires. You think, too, of the solitude beyond companionship, the kind that waits in the open landscape where no footprints last. There's courage in meeting that silence alone. It holds up a mirror, but not a cruel one. It shows you that you are smaller than the world, but still essential to its music. By the time spring hesitates back across the horizon, the silence has changed you. You move more slowly, but with more certainty. You speak less, but mean more. You find yourself listening even in crowds, as if the air between words might reveal another story. When the first migratory birds return, their calls sound almost indecent, too loud, too eager. You smile and forgive them. They haven't learned the winter etiquette yet. Give them time. You think of what the cold and the quiet have taught you. That warmth isn't a material state, but a moral one. It's something you build with attention, with patience, with respect for the space between things. The Icelanders understood this long before they had a word for it. They treated silence as an ally, not an emptiness. They didn't fill it, they kept it. And in doing so, they found the kind of peace that hums instead of shouts. You bank the fire, pull the blanket closer, and let the hush return. Outside, the wind writes invisible poems across the snowdrifts. Inside, the last ember glows like punctuation at the end of a perfect sentence. The house sighs, the land listens, and somewhere between them, you drift into sleep. Carried by the oldest warmth, there is the warmth of quiet understanding. There are nights when the island itself feels alive, breathing, groaning, rearranging its bones beneath the snow. You hear it first as a low rumble in the distance, too deep to be thunder, too patient to be wind. Then, without warning, the mountain moves. Avalanches here do not arrive with ceremony. They begin as a whisper of loosened frost, a trickle of white dust, and then an entire hillside decides to change its mind about being a hillside. You've seen it once, the moonlight flashing off a river of snow, silent at first, then roaring, unstoppable. It devours fences, trails, the memory of where a valley used to be. When it's over, the land looks blank again, peaceful, almost polite. The next morning, people emerge, blinking into the new geography. No one curses the mountain. They nod, sigh, and begin to dig. Because in Iceland, Nature isn't an enemy. It's a landlord with unpredictable moods. You learn that quickly. The same earth that shakes under your feet also gives you warmth from its core. The same volcano that buries a farm in ash will, decades later, bless its descendants with fertile soil. Gratitude and fear live side by side here, sipping the same soup. Sometimes, in the middle of winter, the volcanoes remind everyone that the island's heart is made of fire. The ground trembles, the air tastes of sulfur, and snow turns black overnight. It's a strange sight, ash falling like dark rain onto a world already frozen white. The people step outside, look up at the sky, and murmur something halfway between a prayer and a joke. Well, at least it's warm under there. Because what else can you say to a mountain that sneezes flame? Floods are worse. They arrive when the ice melts too suddenly, when a glacier cracks open like an old chest and releases the rivers it has been hoarding for centuries. The Icelanders call it jökulhlaup, a word that sounds like exactly what it is, a stampede of water breaking free. The first settlers learned fast that no map here lasts forever. A river can move in a day. A valley can vanish in a night. You don't argue with geography, you adjust. You rebuild your fences a little higher, your barns a little farther from the shore, your heart a little tougher each time. And yet, amid all this volatility, there's no bitterness. You never hear anyone call the land cruel. Cruelty implies intent. The island, they say, is simply honest. It never lies about what it is. The wind will always tell you when it's coming. The sea never pretends to be still for long. The volcanoes grumble a warning before they rise to anger. Everything speaks plainly here if you're willing to listen. That honesty seeps into the people too. Icelanders rarely exaggerate. They describe disasters the way other cultures describe the weather. Calmly, almost affectionately. Oh yes, the river took the bridge again, someone will say, as if the bridge had simply wandered off to find better company. You realize that living here teaches a kind of moral geometry. Everything that happens is a transaction with nature, and the price is always exact. Ignore the signs, and you pay. Respect them, and you survive. Once, in late winter, you wake to a silence so deep it makes your ears ache. You step outside and see that the world has been remade overnight. Snow lies chest high against the walls, burying fences and windows. The air is perfectly still. For a moment, you feel like you're standing at the bottom of an ocean of light. Then, somewhere far up the slope, a sound cracks the silence like a whip. The snow shifts. You don't need anyone to explain what's happening. Instinct, older than language, takes over. You run. When it's done, the avalanche has missed the house by 20 paces. The edge of it gleams like a frozen wave caught mid-crash. You look at it, panting, and feel no anger, only awe. The cold isn't malevolent, it's magnificent. It acts according to laws you barely understand. And in doing so, it teaches humility more efficiently than any sermon. Later, as you shovel a path to the door, you catch yourself humming. The tune is light, ridiculous. Somehow laughter feels appropriate, an offering of smallness in the face of grandeur. That's what the island asks of you. To be small correctly. The old people tell stories about the year the sun went missing. A volcanic eruption so large, it could be seen across half the world, through ash high enough to dim daylight for months. Crops failed. Animals died. People spoke in low voices, afraid that the sky might be listening. And yet, Even then, the chronicles describe not despair but endurance. They kept fishing, kept knitting, kept telling stories by the faint orange of ash-choked sunsets. The cold deepened, the faith adjusted. The island whispered, "Still here," and the people whispered back, "So are we." You begin to realize that this constant dialogue between human and landscape is Iceland's true religion. Each eruption, each storm, each thaw is part of a conversation that has lasted over 1,000 years. The tone may change, sometimes scolding, sometimes kind, but the relationship endures. The first Icelanders did not have words for natural disaster. They had words for fate, for weather, for lesson. To them, a flood was not punishment. It was instruction. A volcano did not destroy. It reminded. You can still hear that logic in the way modern Icelanders speak. Earthquakes are the ground stretching. Storms are the wind visiting. It's hard to fear a guest you've already named. That linguistic tenderness fascinates you. In a place where the elements could erase you without effort, people chose to describe them with courtesy. The land taught humility, and humility became language. You start to wonder if that's why Icelandic poetry feels so clean, like breath on a cold window, brief but sincere. It's written in a dialect of acceptance. Even grief here wears mittens. At dusk, you walk out to the edge of the fields, where the snow catches the last light like powdered gold. You can feel the temperature dropping, the air growing brittle. Somewhere beneath your boots, a stream runs under ice, still moving, still singing. You pause to listen. The sound is faint, but steady life humming quietly beneath its own frozen cover. It feels symbolic of the whole island. Stillness on the surface, persistence below. You realize that Iceland never shouts. It teaches in murmurs, in the slow shift of weather, in the patient reshaping of stone. The lessons are simple but absolute. Everything moves in cycles. Nothing belongs to you. Respect is not optional. And as the first stars appear, sharp and blue against the dark, you find yourself smiling at the thought that maybe, just maybe, this land was never meant to be conquered at all. It was meant to be conversed with. The wind rises again, gentle but insistent. You turn back toward the turf house, its windows glowing like the eyes of an animal waiting for you. Behind you, the mountains exhale. Ahead of you, the fire waits. You think, nature isn't cruel, it's just fluent. And you're finally learning the language. There comes a point in every long winter when logic begins to thin like old wool. The nights stretch so far that even the moon seems tired of showing up. The wind hums its lullabies in strange minor keys, and the shapes in the snow outside start to resemble things that watch back. You tell yourself it's nothing, just shadows, just tricks of the firelight, but somewhere deep down, you know the truth. No one survives an Icelandic winter without company, even if that company isn't entirely human. So the people make companions, not with wood or clay, but with imagination. They give the unseen world names, rules, temperaments. The glaciers become sleeping giants. The cliffs grow ears. The dark valleys house the Huldufolk, the hidden people who build invisible homes under the moss and dislike being disturbed. They are not malicious, exactly. They are territorial, like nature itself. You leave them offerings, a bit of bread, a splash of milk, a whispered apology if you've stepped too loudly. And somehow, that feels right, respectful. You wouldn't knock on a stranger's door without greeting them first. Why treat a mountain differently? The trolls are another matter. They are the loud relatives in the family of Icelandic myth. Big, blunt, and not especially subtle. Born from rock and fog, they live in the highlands where the world looks unfinished. Sunlight turns them to stone, which seems less a punishment than an explanation for all the oddly shaped boulders scattered across the landscape. You hear stories of trolls wandering too late at night, arguing over sheep, or falling asleep mid-journey and waking up a century later. Their lives are slow, clumsy reflections of human ones, magnified to mythic proportions. They quarrel, they love, they eat unwisely. They are, in other words, us writ large and covered in lichen. On stormy nights, when the wind howls through the cliffs, you could swear you hear their voices, low, rumbling laughter echoing across the valleys. The old people smile knowingly when you mention it. That's just the trolls, they say. They're telling each other stories about us. You laugh, but not too loudly, because here, disbelief feels like bad manners. The Huldufolk are subtler. You never see them directly, but their etiquette is woven into daily life. Before digging, you ask permission aloud, just in case. When building a new house, you consult someone who can sense their dwellings to avoid placing your door where theirs might be. Entire roads have been rerouted because the hidden people preferred it that way. Outsiders call it superstition. Locals call it diplomacy. You begin to see the wisdom in that. The myth is not literal, it's relational. It teaches attention, respect, coexistence. It says, you are not alone in this world, even when you feel you are. Walk gently. In the deep dark, that thought becomes comforting. The mind, facing endless night, invents light wherever it can. A flicker of belief here, a superstition there. They are psychological lanterns, passed from hand to hand. And perhaps, you think, there's no harm in believing that something watches kindly from the snow. The stories aren't all gentle, of course. Some are warnings carved in narrative form. A traveler who mocks the mountains vanishes. A farmer who takes too much wood from the forest finds his axe gone dull forever. A child who stays out past sunset is led astray by flickering light's willow, the wisps that mimic voices of loved ones. The lesson isn't fear, it's proportion. Everything has a boundary, and the wise respect it. Even the Christmas season, that short window of brightness in the dark, carries its own cast of spectral characters. 13 mischievous Jólasveinar, or Yule lads, descend from the mountains one by one. They are descended from trolls, though more mischievous than monstrous. One steals sausages, another slams doors, another licks spoons. Their mother, however, Grilla, is less charming, a giantess who snatches naughty children in her sack. You grin hearing it for the first time. The old woman across the fire, smiling at your expression. It keeps them inside when the snow is bad, she says simply. Practical mythology. That's Icelandic magic in a nutshell. Half warning, half wink. Over time, you realize these myths are less about believing in trolls than believing in meaning. In a world where weather can erase villages, storytelling becomes a way of leaving handprints on the snow. The folklore doesn't just explain nature, it negotiates with it. It gives the chaos a face, a mood, a name. Once you can talk to something, you can live with it. You remember the old saying whispered before bed, "The land remembers those who listen." Maybe that's what these myths are listening translated into language. Every troll and spirit and hidden person is a voice of the island speaking back through imagination. When you walk alone at dusk and the landscape blurs into twilight, you can feel that presence. Not menacing, not divine, just attentive. The mountains watch, the streams hum. The air itself seems aware of you. You start to greet the hills out of habit, like neighbors whose names you still can't pronounce. Centuries from now, scholars will call this folklore. They will catalog the creatures and symbols, debate their origins, trace their similarities to Celtic, Norse, and Inuit legends. But tonight, sitting by the fire, you see the truth far more clearly. The Icelanders didn't create myths to escape reality, they created them to make it habitable. In a land where storms erase paths overnight, you need stories that can travel without roads. The Huldufolk, the trolls, the spirits they are, emotional cartographers. They mark the boundaries between safety and peril, reverence and arrogance. They teach you to look twice before you step, to listen twice before you speak. You begin to realize that living here is less about endurance and more about relationship. Every rock, every gust of wind is part of a living conversation. The myths simply translated for those who have forgotten the language of weather. You think of that next time you cross a valley under the northern lights. The snow glows faintly green, and your shadow moves with the grace of someone being watched by kindly eyes. You nod to the darkness and whisper, "Good evening." The wind answers softly, carrying a tone that could be laughter or approval. It occurs to you then that maybe the hidden people were never hidden at all. Maybe they were the echo of human reverence, the instinct to see wonder before ownership. And that thought, quiet and humbling, follows you back to the warmth of the fire. When you travel the countryside now, what catches your eye first are not castles or towers. There were never many of those here, but the small, patient churches scattered like lanterns across the valleys. Each one seems less built than grown, as if the land allowed it to rise the way moss allows a flower. They are simple walls of turf or basalt, roofs heavy with grass, doors so small you must bow slightly to enter. Perhaps that was intentional. Humility, here, begins before worship does. Inside, the air smells faintly of peat smoke and candle wax. There are no gilded icons, no echoing choirs, only wood darkened by breath and prayer. The light drips in through narrow windows like honey, too thick to pour. It gathers on the stone altar, on the rough wool coats, on faces weathered enough to have seen every shade of winter. It is not grandeur that moves you, it is endurance. Faith in Iceland was never about conquering fear. It was about negotiating with it again, that Icelandic instinct to bargain rather than defy. When Christianity came to this island in the year 1000, it did not arrive as an army but as a compromise. The Althing, the National Assembly, simply voted. One faith for peace, old gods in private, new one in public. Even religion here preferred consensus over conquest. You can still feel that pragmatism in the churches. They are half sanctuaries, half shelters. In the storms of winter, they become the warmest buildings in the valley, heated not by fire but by collective breath. A congregation of 20 can make the air visible with life. People kneel, sing, cough, laugh softly at a child's mischief, and all of it counts as praise. The Icelanders did not discard their old gods. They folded them neatly into the new faith like extra layers of clothing. The sagas speak of Odin's wisdom and Christ's mercy in the same paragraph, as if the two were neighbors sharing a fence. Some priests told tales of Thor attending Mass politely in disguise. Others admitted that on certain stormy nights, they still asked the old gods for travel luck. After all, who understands lightning better than the one who throws it? You find it oddly comforting, this refusal to purge the past. The Icelanders knew that faith, like warmth, works best when it has depth, multiple sources feeding the same glow. The cross above the altar might be carved from driftwood that once served a pagan boat. The baptismal font might be an old volcanic bowl polished by hand. In Iceland, salvation has always worn a practical coat. Sometimes you visit these churches during travel. From the outside, they look like hills wearing hats. From the inside, they feel like the inside of a palm, curved, sheltering, close. The candles flicker uncertainly, their light trembling in rhythm with the wind outside. Someone hums a hymn too softly to identify, and for a moment, you can feel the centuries fold together, the Norse settlers huddling against the same cold, murmuring to different heavens, asking the same favor, let us see another spring. Faith here doesn't aspire to miracles. It settles for maintenance. It's the faith of people who light one candle instead of two because wax is dear, who whisper their prayers not for wealth but for weather that minds its manners. Even faith here burned like a candle, not a flame, you think. Small, but it refused to die. You see that stubborn candlelight everywhere. On Christmas Eve, when families walk through the snow carrying lanterns to the cemetery, the graves flicker with hundreds of tiny flames, and the whole field looks alive again. On dark mornings, before work, a single candle in a window becomes a beacon to every traveler passing by. It is a gentle theology, faith by accumulation, not spectacle. Every prayer adds another degree to the collective warmth. But sometimes the island tests belief the way it tests everything else with drama. When the earthquakes come, the bells ring by themselves. When volcanoes erupt, villagers gather on the church hill to watch molten fire flow down the valley, glowing against the snow. Some cross themselves, others cross their arms. One old man mutters, "The Lord moves the furniture again." No panic, only awe. And when the ash settles, they clean, rebuild, and ring the bells again because in Iceland, to rebuild is itself a form of worship. Every repaired roof, every shoveled path is a hymn made visible. You think of that each time you pass one of the old wooden churches, their paint fading, their walls leaning slightly but still standing against 1,000 storms. They are less monuments than habits. The habit of gathering, of hoping, of thanking the sky even when it ignores you. They remind you that faith is not about being sure, it's about showing up anyway. There's humor in Icelandic religion, too dry, practical, born of coexistence with chaos. A pastor once prayed for better weather, and when the storm worsened, the congregation joked that God had only understood the more part. Someone else asked whether heaven had fjords. The priest replied, "Only the well-behaved ones." Faith here smiles at itself, which might be why it survives. When the world is unpredictable, laughter is a kind of amen. In some villages, the line between sacred and domestic disappears completely. The same hands that bake bread bake the communion loaves. The same table that hosts Sunday prayers holds Monday mending. The same bench that supports a psalm on Christmas holds a sleeping child by New Year's. Holiness isn't confined to stone walls. It leaks into everything, like warmth through wool. You walk one afternoon to a church near the sea, a small, black-tarred building crouched against the wind. The door creaks when you open it, and the inside smells of salt and varnish. A single beam of sunlight sneaks through the window, falling across the pews in a path of gold. The air is cold enough to bite, yet somehow it feels kinder here. You sit, not to pray, but to listen. The wind hums through the cracks like a low organ note. You can almost hear the congregation of centuries, their murmurs layered like strata of devotion. You wonder how many times the same prayers have been repeated in this room, how many times hope has been recycled here like old wool turned into new mittens. You touch the worn wood of the pew and feel it smooth beneath your fingers, burnished by generations of hands. Faith, you realize, is like that too, softened by use, sturdy by necessity. When you leave, the door swings shut behind you with a sigh that sounds very much like contentment. Later, standing outside in the wind, you look back at the small church, its roof glittering with frost. Against the vast backdrop of mountain and sky, it seems impossibly small an ember in a world of ice. And yet, that ember endures. It doesn't challenge the darkness. It decorates it. You think of all the small things that keep this island alive. A fire's glow, a song, a knitted sock, a whispered story, a single candle in a storm. Faith belongs among them, not towering above, but nestled within. Perhaps that's the secret. In Iceland, belief has always been a conversation, never a conquest. The island doesn't demand worship. It invites companionship. The mountains don't need cathedrals to praise them. They have silence for that. The people, pragmatic as ever, have learned to keep their gods close and their fires closer. You turn toward home, the horizon dimming to that peculiar Icelandic twilight, where light and dark overlap like two polite neighbors sharing a fence. Somewhere behind you, a bell rings, carried by wind across the snow. You can't tell whether it's calling people to service or simply marking time. Either way, it sounds like faith doing what it does best, surviving quietly, beautifully, without explanation. By now you've stopped thinking of the cold as something to defeat. You've tried, of course every newcomer does. You've wrapped yourself in layers, built bigger fires, cursed the wind in languages older than Iceland itself. And each time, the cold has smiled, patient, amused, and carried on doing exactly what it was always going to do. Eventually, you learn. Not quickly and not painlessly, but thoroughly. You learn that resistance only exhausts you, while acceptance reshapes you. The cold teaches balance the way a stern teacher teaches handwriting, through endless repetition until your fingers remember the right pressure. You adjust your pace, your expectations, your idea of comfort. You begin to move in harmony with the season instead of against it. That's when you notice the real transformation. The cold has stopped biting. It's still cold. Yes, your breath still fogs, your boots still crunch, but something in you has stopped recoiling. You've grown fluent in frost. The island keeps teaching, lesson after lesson. Some are gentle. A clear night after a storm. The quiet dignity of a frozen waterfall. the clean taste of air that has never known summer. Others are cruel, but fair. A friend lost to the sea, a roof torn away, a harvest buried too soon. Each one carries the same refrain: be humble or be gone. Humility becomes a kind of religion here. You start thanking the weather for its honesty. It never flatters. It never lies. It will kill you, yes, but it will never deceive you first. And in that brutal clarity, you find peace. Because honesty, even from a blizzard, is easier to live with than false comfort. When the world beyond Iceland rushes and burns, this place remains deliberate. The island has no use for speed. It knows that everything alive here must take its time. Lava cools slowly. Ice melts reluctantly. People, too, learn to delay their anger, their grief, even their joy until the moment is right. That's not repression, it's rhythm. You begin to see it in daily life. The farmer checks the sky before every task, knowing that stubbornness is expensive. The fisherman waits for the right tide rather than daring the wrong one. The shepherds watch their flocks move across the hills, reading patterns in their behavior like scripture. This is the island's education, not domination, but attention. And attention, you realize, is its own form of love. The cold teaches cooperation as well. You can't outlast an Icelandic winter alone. You share tools, food, laughter, silence. You lend your shovel. You borrow your neighbor's patience. You stop keeping track of who owes whom because by spring it's impossible to tell who saved whose life. Community isn't charity here, it's common sense. You think back to the first settlers who came chasing freedom and found interdependence instead. They learned quickly that the land doesn't reward independence. It rewards coordination. One person can chop the wood. Another can weave the wool. Another can tell the story that keeps the night from feeling endless. That's how Iceland survives, as a choir, not a solo. There's humor in that realization, the kind that comes from being repeatedly humbled. When your roof leaks for the fourth time, you stop swearing and start laughing. When the wind steals your laundry, you salute it for its persistence. Even death here earns a kind of grim respect. A man buried by snow is said to have gone home early. You can't be bitter towards something so inevitable. You can only learn to keep your shovel handy. You find that the people who endure the best are the ones who treat hardship like a mischievous friend, annoying but necessary. They swap stories about near misses and accidents the way others trade gossip. I lost a boot in that river once, someone says. It probably made it to the sea by now. They laugh, sip coffee, and plan to try again tomorrow. That's resilience in its truest form. Humor as armor, not denial. Sometimes, on rare bright mornings when the snow reflects more light than your eyes can bear, you feel a sudden affection for the cold itself. You catch yourself thinking it's beautiful not because it's kind, but because it's honest about its power. The ice on the river gleams like glass. The mountains glow blue in the distance. Even the air feels newly invented. You inhale, and it tastes like the alphabet of beginnings. You realize the cold isn't trying to destroy life. It's testing who truly wants to live. And those who pass that test, people, animals, even plants, are granted a kind of fierce grace. They don't bloom easily, but when they do, they last. You start to see yourself in that logic. You are not surviving despite the cold. You are surviving with it. Every breath is a collaboration. Centuries pass in your mind's eye, the island evolving, the people refining the same old conversation with nature. The tools change, the words change, but the tone remains the same: respectful, witty, uncomplaining. The cold still dictates the tempo, and everyone still listens. Modern Icelanders heat their homes with geothermal warmth, tap into the volcanoes for electricity, swim in hot springs while snowflakes melt in their hair. Even their comfort is borrowed from the cold's generosity. Beneath the ice, beneath the rock, the same fire burns that once terrified the settlers. Now it lights their cities. That's the most Icelandic transformation of all, turning adversity into infrastructure. You imagine the old gods nodding approvingly. They were never jealous of progress. They only demanded acknowledgement. And Iceland, pragmatic as ever, has never forgotten to say thank you. Every geothermal plant is, in its way, a temple built to the teacher below. The lesson endures in subtler ways too. It lives in the language, those long, careful words that carry weather inside them. It lives in the music, where melancholy and joy share the same melody. It lives in the architecture, where every window is a compromise between light and wind. Even the national character, calm, patient, quietly humorous, feels like the product of 1,000 polite negotiations with hardship. When visitors ask how Icelanders stay so unbothered by isolation, the answer comes easily: because solitude here is never empty. The island itself is company enough. On your last evening in this chapter of life, you walk out beyond the houses. The night is clear, the air brittle. The stars look freshly minted. The aurora drifts above like a slow curtain, green and white, the quietest applause imaginable. You listen, not for words, but for meaning. The land doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in temperature, in distance, in rhythm. And this is what it says: to live here is to make peace with the impossible. You whisper it back, just to hear how it sounds aloud. The phrase feels heavy and true. It rolls out of your mouth like steam and fades before it reaches the mountains. But you know they heard you. They always do. Back inside, the fire waits faithfully. You shed your coat, your gloves, your exhaustion. The room smells of peat and wool. You sit down, close your eyes, and let the silence fill every corner. You think of all that the cold has given you: humility, patience, attentiveness, humor. You realize that survival was never the final lesson. The final lesson is gratitude. Because in the end, the cold never wanted to kill you. It wanted to teach you balance, to remind you that warmth means nothing unless you've known its opposite. The wind rattles the window once, softly, like a hand tapping in farewell. You smile. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, slow and soundless. It covers the footprints leading to your door, erases them gently, mercifully. The land resets the page. The story pauses, waiting for the next voice to continue. You whisper one last line, half prayer, half acknowledgement. The cold was never the enemy. It was the teacher. And the teacher, having done its work, lets you rest. By the time you've lived here long enough to stop counting winters, you start to see beauty hiding in strange places. Not the soft, postcard kind of beauty, flowers and sunlight and tidy symmetry, but the raw, indifferent sort that doesn't ask for your approval. The kind that stares back at you and says, "Take it or leave it." The first settlers must have felt it too. How else could they have stayed? There's a peculiar grace in this landscape. Mountains shaped by old violence, valleys carved by vanished glaciers, lava fields that still remember the color of fire. Nothing here tries to please the eye. It simply exists, immaculate in its honesty. At first, that honesty feels uncomfortable. You come from gentler lands, where the horizon behaves, where trees arrange themselves politely along hillsides. Here, the earth looks half-finished, as though the gods started sculpting and then got distracted. The rivers twist in defiance of straight lines. The beaches are made of black sand that swallows footprints as quickly as you make them. And yet, one day you find yourself standing on a cliff with the wind tearing at your coat, and you realize you wouldn't trade this view for any garden. There's grace in the things that test us. The mountain doesn't apologize for its sharpness, nor the sea for its cold. They remind you that beauty was never meant to be comfortable. You learn to love contrasts. The way green moss glows against the basalt, neon as a bruise. The way snow turns everything monochrome until the first light returns, and suddenly the world looks hand-tinted. You learn that the smell of sulfur can coexist with the scent of rain, and that both, somehow, mean home. Even decay looks lovely here. Abandoned turf houses slump back into the earth with the dignity of elders lying down to rest. Rusted farm tools bloom with lichen. Driftwood, bleached and twisted, lies on black shores like sculpture. Nothing is wasted. Everything changes form. Icelandic beauty is circular. It decomposes elegantly. Visitors sometimes call the landscape harsh, as if harshness were a flaw. The locals just shrug. To them, the word means alive. A storm, after all, is only weather in motion. You remember once asking an old farmer whether he ever grew tired of the wind. He smiled, squinting toward the horizon. "If the wind stops, I'll start worrying," he said. And you understood then that acceptance here isn't resignation, it's respect. There's a particular morning that stays with you. The air is clear enough to see the curvature of the earth. The sea mirrors the sky so perfectly that the line between them disappears. A flock of Arctic terns wheels overhead, shrieking their fragile, furious songs. Their wings flash silver against the clouds. You watch them dive and rise, never resting, and think, this is what devotion looks like without poetry. The cold bites at your cheeks. The wind claws at your hood. Yet your heart feels strangely warm, as if the landscape has whispered a secret directly into it. You are temporary, but you belong. You laugh aloud, half from joy, half from disbelief, and the sound is immediately stolen by the air. That feels right. Nothing personal here lasts, not even laughter, and that's part of the lesson. You begin to see that beauty isn't a reward, it's a reminder. The mountains don't flatter you with softness. They ask questions instead. Can you stand still in discomfort? Can you find peace without gentleness? You start answering yes, slowly, one day at a time. There's beauty in the burn of cold air in your lungs, in the ache of muscles from shoveling snow, in the silence that follows a storm. You stop needing everything to be easy. You start wanting things to be true. Even your sense of color changes. You begin to prefer muted tones, the gray of ash, the brown of thawing fields, the blue that lives only in ice. When you look at a bright summer meadow now, it feels almost too loud. You've developed an eye for understatement. You realize, perhaps for the first time, that gentleness without strength is fragility, and strength without gentleness is cruelty. The Icelandic landscape lives exactly in between. It is the geography of balance. One evening you climb a ridge just before sunset. The wind has quieted for once. The world holds its breath. Below you, a glacier glows like marble. Above, the sky drifts from gold to indigo. The silence is so complete that even your heartbeat sounds like trespass. You think of every hardship, the storms, the hunger, the endless dark, and it suddenly makes sense. Without contrast, beauty loses its meaning. Without cold, warmth is ordinary. Without hardship, gratitude never learns to stand on its own legs. The wind stirs again, gentle this time, brushing your face like a farewell. You smile. All right, you say to no one in particular. Lesson understood. Then you start the slow walk home, the light dimming behind you, the snow beginning to fall. And as it does, you realize the island has given you something priceless, the ability to see grace in what once felt unbearable. The world will never be gentle, but you've learned how to see gentleness in the world anyway. In Iceland, time is not measured in hours so much as in brightness. The clock is an unreliable companion here. It lies every 6 months. For half the year, the sun refuses to leave. For the other half, it cannot find the courage to rise. The people have stopped expecting consistency. Instead, they've learned to dance with the erratic partner that is light. During summer, night becomes a rumor. The sun circles the horizon like a lazy cat that never quite settles. Midnight looks like afternoon through a thin veil of gold. Shadows grow confused, forgetting which way to lean. You can read outside at 2 a.m., which feels mischievous, like borrowing time from another world. Sleep becomes a suggestion rather than a rule. Windows are covered with thick curtains, but still the light leaks in persistent, innocent, unstoppable. At first, the endless day feels intoxicating. The whole country hums with borrowed energy. People fish at midnight, paint houses at 1 in the morning, climb mountains just to see what a sunrise looks like when it forgets to end. But by July, you start to notice the smiles turning slower. Eyes squint against perpetual daylight. Conversations drift toward longing for darkness, for rest, for mystery. The lesson repeats. Even abundance, unchecked, becomes its own kind of burden. Then comes the turn. August exhales. The light begins to fall earlier, shyly at first, as if apologizing. Shadows grow definition. The air smells of iron and apples. You feel the year closing its book, marking the page with a leaf. The shift happens quietly, and yet everything depends on it. By November, darkness has taken charge. Morning arrives late, sulky and reluctant. Noon lasts a handful of hours. Evening returns before the soup has cooled. You wake in the dark, eat in the dark, dream in a palette of blue and gray. The world shrinks to the circle of firelight, and your mind, strangely, expands. Darkness here is not emptiness. It is an education. It teaches slowness, concentration, intimacy. People knit, write, cook, read aloud. They learn the precise texture of silence. They light candles not to defy the night, but to converse with it. In that faint halo of warmth, everything unnecessary disappears. What remains feels truer. There is a rhythm in this alternation, a breath, an inhale and exhale written into the year. The land itself practices mindfulness. Light works, dark rests, and the people, wise enough to listen, adapt their pulse accordingly. You notice it in the villages. In June, streets echo with laughter, outdoor music, open windows. In January, doors close gently, curtains draw. The glow comes from within. Neither season is superior. Both are required. The Icelanders do not fight the dark or worship the sun, they partner with both. Balance is not found in the middle, it's found in movement between extremes. You start to emulate that. On bright nights, you stay awake, writing, wandering, living twice in a single day. On dark afternoons, you let yourself drift into naps, into thought, into stillness. Productivity becomes seasonal, and you stop feeling guilty about it. You are, finally, aligned with the planet's heartbeat instead of the clock's. It's strange how darkness can feel generous once you stop resisting it. You begin to notice small miracles, auroras weaving ribbons of green silk through the sky, stars so sharp they look carved, snow that glows faintly like the memory of daylight. The world isn't empty, it's inverted. The light has simply moved inward, to your hearth, to your mind, to the small acts of care that keep life steady. The Icelanders have a word for this quiet coexistence. Higa has cousins here, but theirs tastes more of peat smoke and sea salt. It's the warmth of presence, not heat of temperature. It's the hum of contentment, while the storm screams politely outside. You find old calendars in a museum, carved with strange marks, solstices, equinoxes, long pauses where the sun barely changed position. The ancients didn't count days so much as moods of the sky. It makes sense. On this island, you don't conquer time, you interpret it. Even now, the modern rhythm remains ancient. Offices shift schedules to follow daylight. Farmers and fishermen, artists and students, everyone measures themselves by the arc of illumination. When the light returns after winter, people step outside with faces tilted upward, silent, grateful, as if receiving a benediction. They don't cheer, they absorb. The body remembers joy, even when the mouth forgets how to name it. You begin to think of light and dark as companions rather than opposites. They are two halves of a conversation. Light asks questions. Dark answers them. Light reveals. Dark restores. The island would die without either, and so would you. One night, deep in January, you stand beneath the aurora again. The cold gnaws gently at your fingers. The snow whispers underfoot. Above you, the sky ripples green, violet, white, like a slow heartbeat written in color. It's breathtaking, yes, but also humbling, because you realize this spectacle isn't for you. It would happen whether anyone watched or not, and somehow that makes it even more beautiful. You whisper to yourself, to live here is to remember both sides of the day. The wind agrees. When spring comes at last, it feels like waking from a polite coma. The first dawn that lasts past breakfast feels miraculous. The first bird call at 3 a.m. feels like mischief. Flowers return, modest ones, not tropical braggarts. Moss brightens. Waterfalls swell. Sheep blink at the sudden clarity. The island seems to laugh softly, as though embarrassed by its earlier gloom. And you? You laugh too, knowing the darkness will come again. But that's fine. You've learned its language now. You've learned that joy isn't the absence of shadow. It's the glow that persists inside it. Light and dark, work and rest, movement and stillness, these are not choices. They're choreography. And somewhere between them, in that flickering balance, Iceland teaches you how to live. Balance. It's the quiet word that underpins everything in Iceland, a country made of contradictions that somehow get along. Fire beneath ice, darkness beside light, isolation that breeds connection. Here, equilibrium isn't a goal, it's a survival instinct. You learn it the same way you learn to walk on ice slowly, carefully, and by falling a few times. You start to notice that the entire island breathes in rhythm with this idea. The wind rages, then retreats. The volcano burns, then sleeps. The tides advance, then bow politely back to the sea. Nothing stays extreme for long. Even destruction here knows when to pause. And so, the people follow suit. They don't chase perpetual joy, nor do they wallow in hardship. They navigate between them like sailors, steering through shifting fog, eyes sharp, heart steady, humor intact. Because in Iceland, if you can't laugh at what tries to kill you, you'll run out of laughter altogether. Balance shows up in small things first. The way a farmer pats a stubborn horse instead of shouting at it. The way a fisherman pours coffee for his friend before mending a net. The way a family lights exactly one candle, no more, no less, and calls the room bright. There's modesty to it, not the kind that hides, but the kind that knows enough. You begin to understand that abundance is rarely the point. The point is proportion. Enough warmth to thaw your fingers, enough food to last the week, enough light to remind you what color looks like. Too much comfort dulls the senses. Too much struggle breaks them. Balance, once again, is the teacher. The landscape reinforces the lesson every day. You walk along a coastline where waves strike black cliffs like hammers. The air tastes of salt and iron. For a moment, the sea looks merciless, almost violent, until a ray of sun slips through the clouds and turns the spray to diamonds. Beauty and danger share the same sentence here. You just have to pause long enough to read both parts. The volcanoes do the same. They destroy and create with equal enthusiasm. A lava field that swallowed a village 2 centuries ago now glitters with green moss, soft as velvet, vivid as new life. It's as if the land itself believes in second chances. Standing there, you realize balance isn't a line to walk, but a cycle to honor. The end of one thing is the raw material of another. Loss becomes soil. Silence becomes song. Cold becomes clarity. In town, you notice balance expressed socially too. Icelanders work hard, but not obsessively. When the weather is good, which, admittedly, is a matter of interpretation, they drop everything to go outside. Meetings dissolve into picnics. Offices empty toward waterfalls. The logic is simple. You never waste a clear day here. Time, like daylight, is borrowed, not owned. And when storms arrive, everything slows down without guilt. No one apologizes for staying home. The wind is working today, they say, as if the weather had taken over all the jobs. You begin to envy that grace, the ability to adapt instead of resist. It's mindfulness, though they don't call it that. It's simply life lived according to conditions, not expectations. You start adopting small Icelandic habits without realizing it. You stop checking your phone when the sky changes color. You take your coffee slower, standing near the window just to watch snow swirl like falling dust. You speak less, but mean more. You begin to prefer silence over noise, not because silence is easier, but because it feels honest. Even chores become meditative. Chopping wood, fixing a door hinge, hanging laundry beside the stove, these acts feel ancient, sacred in their simplicity. You begin to understand that balance isn't abstract philosophy. It's physical rhythm. It's the sound of a kettle boiling, the pattern of your own breath matching the fire's crackle. You find yourself breathing deeper here. The air insists on it. The Icelanders have a word for perseverance that blends practicality with poetry. Aðduga. It means to endure, but not stoically, more like to make do, to manage with quiet dignity. It's not heroic endurance, it's domestic endurance. It's the calm voice that says, "We'll be fine. We always are." That's balance, to endurance without drama. You hear it in their tone when storms cancel ferries, when sheep stray, when pipes freeze. No panic, no sighing. Just a shrug, a plan, and a kettle on the stove. The culture doesn't romanticize suffering, but it also doesn't fear it. They treat difficulty like an annual visitor, inconvenient, yes, but familiar. You start to internalize that attitude. When something goes wrong, your first instinct isn't despair anymore. It's adaptation. The question changes from "why me?" to "what now?" And that shift feels like maturity. Balance also means not demanding permanence from things meant to change. You watch glaciers move, slow as thought, carving valleys that will outlast every memory. You watch rivers rewrite their courses each spring. Even the land refuses to cling to shape. So why should you? You stop trying to freeze moments in photographs. You let them pass through you instead, like light through water. The memory becomes the warmth left afterward, not the snapshot. You understand at last what Icelanders mean when they talk about listening to the weather. It isn't about predicting storms. It's about letting impermanence make you gentle. You find balance in relationships too. Conversation here is spacious. People talk, then pause, letting silence do half the work. When someone says yes, it can mean "I agree," or "I hear you," or simply "I'm thinking." Nobody rushes to fill the quiet. It's considered polite to leave room for thought, a generosity of space that feels radical in a noisy world. Even laughter is balanced, low, sincere, never manic. Humor here doesn't punch. It leans. It's the sound of endurance dressed in wit. One day, someone asks what you've learned from living in Iceland. You think for a long time before answering. I learned that peace isn't the absence of struggle, it's the art of sharing a roof with it. They nod. Then you're learning correctly. Later, walking alone by the sea, you think about that. The wind bites, the tide hisses, the air carries salt and memory. You realize that the island never tried to make life easy for you, it just made it honest. It has stripped away distraction until all that remains is essential. Warmth, companionship, patience, humility, the occasional soup. You smile. Balance, it seems, is not a reward but a practice, one you recommit to each morning like tending a fire. The horizon glows faintly pink now, promising another short day. The waves continue their eternal argument with the rocks, loud, tireless, unresolvable. But even that conflict has rhythm, beauty, meaning. You stand and listen until the wind fills the silence again. And quietly, you think, you don't conquer the storm, you breathe with it. By now, Iceland has become less a place and more a feeling that lives in you, a steady pulse of wind and wonder that hums beneath everything else. You've stopped trying to describe it. Words feel too small for a landscape that can erase roads overnight and still smell like fresh rain the next morning. It's not a country you visit. It's one that slowly rewrites you. At first, you thought survival here meant endurance, thick coats, patience, stubbornness. But over time, you realized that endurance alone wasn't enough. You had to listen. You had to let the island teach you its language of balance, of silence, of respect. You had to become fluent in stillness. And somewhere between the storms and the calm, you learned. What you learned was simple, though not easy. The land doesn't owe you comfort. It offers beauty, but only if you approach gently. It rewards attention, not conquest. You can't demand kindness from a glacier or affection from a volcano, but if you stand quietly long enough, they'll let you stay. You learn that warmth means more when it's shared, that silence doesn't have to be lonely, that a small cup of coffee by a small fire can hold as much joy as any grand adventure. You learn that peace is not found by escaping difficulty, but by befriending it. And perhaps most importantly, you learn that nature is not indifferent, it's just busy being everything at once. When you walk now, you do it slower. You feel the ground beneath your boots, uneven and honest. You notice how each step sounds different depending on the snow's age, powder whispers, crust groans, slush sighs. You pay attention because Iceland has trained you to. Every sound is a small report from the earth, still stable, still alive, still teaching. The air is crisp enough to taste. You fill your lungs, exhale, and watch your breath drift upward like a ghost, too shy to haunt anything. For a moment, you think, maybe this is what prayer was meant to be before we built walls around it. You keep walking. In the distance, steam rises from a geothermal vent, a white plume curling into the sky. The ground beneath it is warm, dotted with patches of green even in winter. It feels symbolic proof that warmth doesn't have to shout to exist. You crouch down, press your hand to the earth, and feel it breathe back. That's when you realize the island has always been alive, and you have always been part of it. There's a story locals tell, not a legend exactly, more of a saying disguised as one. It goes that when God finished creating the world, there were bits of leftover rock, ice, and fire. So he tossed them together, laughed, and said, "Let's see who survives here." Then he blinked, and Iceland happened. The humor is gentle, not blasphemous, because even in the joke, there's reverence and understanding that living here means participating in the world's unfinished experiment. And somehow, that feels comforting. Perfection is overrated. Persistence is divine. When spring finally arrives, truly arrives, with green hints under the gray, you don't celebrate loudly. You don't throw festivals or make vows. You just open the door and breathe the new air, faintly sweet, faintly shy. The meltwater runs fast now, laughing in small silver voices. Birds return, unsure but hopeful. You realize that Iceland doesn't do new beginnings the way other places do. It prefers slow awakenings. The ice recedes inch by inch, and life follows behind it like a patient child. Renewal here is quiet, less like fireworks, more like forgiveness. The people feel it too. They start smiling again, but not because winter was cruel. They smile because they've earned the right to see color again. Every petal, every patch of grass feels like a miracle personally addressed to them. And you, standing among them, feel a warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. The truth is, the cold never really left you. It lingers in your bones, but no longer as an intruder. It lives there now, peacefully, beside the warmth. Together they form something new, resilience perhaps, or just awareness. Because Iceland doesn't teach you to chase comfort, it teaches you to carry it. It doesn't promise ease, it offers clarity. The kind that whispers, you can't control the weather, but you can decide how to face it. You think about that a lot, about how small acts, done steadily, can become philosophies. Lighting a candle, knitting a scarf, checking on your neighbor before the storm hits. These are not chores. They are declarations of balance. They are ways of saying, we're still here, together, breathing with the storm. If you were to explain Iceland now, you'd start with the smallness that feels like grace. You'd say it's a country that remembers its own fragility and therefore treasures everything that endures. You'd say it's a place where survival and beauty are synonyms. You'd say it's proof that peace isn't passive, it's an active choice made daily, in weather, in work, in kindness. And you'd say that the cold was never cruel, it was honest, honest enough to show you what matters. Evening falls again, your last one before you leave, or maybe your 1000th one since you arrived. It's hard to tell anymore. The snow is falling gently, the world wrapped in quiet. Inside your window, a single candle burns. Its flame flickers but doesn't falter. You think of all the people who came before, the settlers, the storytellers, the farmers, the poets, each adding their own warmth to the long Icelandic night. You realize that the island never belonged to any of them. They simply belonged with it, for a while. Long enough to listen, long enough to learn. You take a sip of tea, still too hot, and smile at the burn. Even the warmth here has teeth. The wind shifts outside, brushing against the walls with the tenderness of an old friend. The sound is comforting now. It used to keep you awake. Now it rocks you to sleep. You lean back, eyes heavy, and let the rhythm of it settle around you like a lullaby. The lesson of the land repeats, soft as snow. You don't conquer the storm, you breathe with it. You whisper the words aloud, the way you might hum a favorite song before drifting off. The candle flickers, steadies, glows. Somewhere beyond the window, the mountains breathe. The cold exhales. The night deepens. And you, warm, quiet, content, finally understand what the Icelanders meant all along. The cold was never the enemy. It was the teacher. And tonight, the lesson is complete. By the time the last snow of winter melts into the cracks of basalt and the rivers start whispering again, Iceland feels less like a place and more like an old friend, one who never tried to impress you, but who taught you everything you didn't know you needed. You've seen its temper and its tenderness. You felt the way it tests patience, rearranges priorities, and rewards only those who listen. And now, as you prepare to leave, or perhaps just to rest, you realize that you no longer think of the cold as an obstacle. You think of it as a presence, stern, instructive, oddly affectionate. The Icelanders learned this long before you. Their entire history is a negotiation with the impossible, farming on volcanic soil, building homes where trees refuse to grow, finding laughter in 6 months of night. The miracle isn't that they survived, it's that they made survival look like culture. You sit by a window, the glass rimmed with frost even though it's spring. Outside, a horse moves slowly across the field, steam rising from its nostrils like prayer. The horizon is a thin gray line dividing two immensities, sky and sea, and between them lies a strip of land that has spent 1,000 years teaching people humility. You think about those first settlers again, stepping off their longboats onto a shore that didn't want them. They brought with them habits from gentler lands, plows, songs, superstitions, pride. Most of it froze. What survived was patience. That became the cornerstone of Icelandic philosophy. Over centuries, patience turned to poetry. The sagas told not of conquest, but of coexistence heroes who fought bravely, yes, but also farmers who waited for lambing season, lovers who endured long winters apart, and wanderers who found beauty in returning home. It wasn't glory they celebrated. It was endurance refined into art. The fire in the hearth pops softly. Its warmth isn't heroic either, just steady. You stare into it and realize that Iceland's secret isn't that it conquered nature. It's synchronized with it. Every challenge became choreography. The wind dictates the dance. The people follow, graceful out of necessity. When the cold pressed hardest, they didn't rage, they brewed coffee, lit candles, told stories. When volcanoes erupted, they rebuilt using the same lava that buried them. When darkness came, they sang. Every disaster left behind a vocabulary for resilience. You smile at the thought. Perhaps the island itself composes these lessons, sending them out like weather forecasts. Today's wisdom: dress warmly, love quietly, accept uncertainty. Even now, the modern Icelanders live by those forecasts. They heat their homes with the earth's breath, swim in hot springs while snow falls around them, publish more books per capita than any other country on earth. Maybe that's what balance looks like when practiced for 1,000 years, a culture that doesn't just endure but illuminates. They laugh easily, but not loudly. They work steadily, but never frantically. They trust the land but never presume upon it. Their calmness isn't denial, it's fluency. They've been conversing with volcanoes long enough to know when to pause between sentences. You think of all the wisdom that could only come from such a place. Asterisk. That warmth isn't absence of cold, it's cooperation with it. Asterisk. That solitude isn't punishment, it's a form of listening. Asterisk. That beauty doesn't have to be soft. Sometimes it's carved from endurance. These truths sound simple now, but simplicity is the highest form of refinement. Iceland has been refining itself since before humans could pronounce its name. Night falls slowly. You step outside and the air feels thin enough to hear through. The snow crunches under your boots, that familiar rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. Above you, clouds drift apart, and the northern lights unfurl like curtains opening on a final act. It never gets old, that sight. No matter how many times you've seen it, it still feels like the sky remembering how to dream. Bands of green and violet ripple across the stars, silent as thought. You imagine the ancestors watching this same display 1,000 years ago, the same awe, the same laughter, maybe even the same words whispered to the sky. You win. And maybe that's the point. The island always wins, but it wins kindly. It doesn't destroy its people. It educates them. It teaches them to live without illusions of control, to find peace not after the storm but within it. You think of the line you once heard from an Icelandic poet. The world doesn't owe us mercy, so we learn to make our own. That's the essence of Iceland mercy, handmade. Like woolen socks or strong coffee, practical and beautiful at once. You return inside, cheeks stinging pleasantly from the cold. The candle on the table has burned low, wax pooling like melted ice. You pour a little more tea, now lukewarm, and find that even the taste of it carries memory, mineral water, volcanic soil, steam. Every element here is recycled, reborn, reused, including meaning. You open your notebook, thinking you might write something grand to summarize it all. But the pen hesitates. What could possibly capture this place? You settle instead for one sentence, simple and certain. They didn't fight the cold. They learned its rhythm. You close the notebook. The flame wavers once, then steadies. Somewhere beyond the window, the wind shifts again, carrying the scent of salt and ash, the two perfumes of Iceland. You smile, realizing that you've joined a long tradition of people who came here seeking understanding and left humbled instead. Humility, after all, is the truest form of wisdom, and Iceland, patient as ever, has been offering it freely to anyone willing to stay long enough to listen. The lesson continues tomorrow, as it always does. For now, the teacher allows you rest. The morning arrives without fanfare, just a slow brightening at the edges of the world. You wake to the hush that always follows snowfall, the kind of quiet that sounds almost holy. The kettle sighs, the floor creaks, the house breathes. Beyond the window, everything is white again, every shape softened, every mistake forgiven. It feels appropriate that Iceland ends this way, not with a flourish, but with a pause. The island never cared for grand exits. It prefers conclusions that feel like exhalations, the sort that settle in the chest and stay there. You step outside, mug in hand. Steam curls upward, a small imitation of the geothermal plumes that rise miles away. The sky is pearly, undecided between silver and blue. The cold presses gently against your face, not cruelly, not even challengingly, but with the quiet authority of a teacher checking whether you still remember the lesson. You do. The land stretches silent in every direction. Hills wear snow like patience. The sea glints dull pewter beneath a thin Sunday somewhere far off. A raven calls a sound so stark it could crack glass. You listen to it echo and fade. That echo is the last thread connecting you to everything you've learned here. You think of all the forms the cold has taken in your time on the island. The biting wind that taught humility, the crystalline air that sharpened thought, the frost that reminded you how precious movement is. Each encounter left a mark, but not a wound. If anything, the cold has been sculpting you, rounding off the unnecessary edges, leaving behind only what endures. You smile at the thought. Maybe that's what survival really is, refinement. Inside, the radio murmurs in Icelandic, that lilting, unhurried language that sounds like the sea thinking aloud. You understand only fragments, but it doesn't matter. The rhythm says enough. Today will be cold. Tomorrow will be brighter. Both will be fine. The newsreader's calm tone reminds you that this place measures catastrophe differently. A storm isn't breaking news, it's just weather doing its job. An eruption is inconvenient, yes, but also interesting. The Icelandic temperament doesn't swing, it sways. That, too, is balance learned from the land. You sit for a while, listening to the cadence of a nation comfortable with impermanence. It makes you wonder how much energy the rest of the world wastes fighting what Iceland simply accepts. Maybe wisdom isn't knowing how to change the weather. Maybe it's knowing when not to. By noon, a weak light slides across the room, warming the rim of your cup. It's enough to see by, enough to write by. You open your notebook again, the same one that carries soot-smudged fingerprints and half-frozen ink. You flip past earlier pages, observations, fragments, jokes that no longer need explaining, and find a blank sheet. You write slowly, the words forming like frost patterns. To live here is to make peace with the impossible. You stop, stare at the line, and realize it's not just about Iceland anymore. It's about everything: the work, the waiting, the trying. You've been translating this lesson into daily life without even noticing. Patience isn't just for storms. Stillness isn't just for snow. Acceptance isn't surrender. It's participation. Afternoon drifts in quietly, the sky dimming to gray. You walk down to the harbor, boots crunching on packed snow. The boats rock lazily, their ropes creaking, their hulls crusted with ice. A fisherman waves, his beard rimed with salt. You wave back, sharing a smile that needs no words. He points toward the sea. The horizon there is a blur of motion waves rising and folding, endlessly undecided. You think, even the ocean hasn't figured it out, and it's been at this for billions of years. It comforts you. Uncertainty suddenly feels like belonging. If the sea can keep changing its mind and still be magnificent, maybe so can you. In the small church on the hill, candles burn against the dusk. You step inside, drawn less by faith than by warmth. The air smells of wood polish and melted wax. A single voice hums softly near the altar, an old woman wiping pews, singing to herself. The tune is slow, repetitive, more lullaby than hymn. You sit in the back, listening. Each note feels like a thread connecting centuries, the same melody someone might have sung during a storm in 1200, or in 1800 when the ash fell thick as night. The voice wavers, but never breaks. You close your eyes and think, this is what endurance sounds like when it learns harmony. Outside, the wind begins again, rattling the door gently as if reminding everyone that peace is temporary. But even that reminder feels kind. When evening arrives, you walk home through the half-light. The snow glows faintly underfoot, reflecting a moon hidden by clouds. You think of how many times this same path has been walked by farmers, lovers, poets, ghosts. The prints of generations overlap invisibly beneath yours. The air tastes of cold iron and wood smoke. Somewhere ahead, the window of your house glows amber. The sight tugs at you the way a familiar voice does at the end of a long day. You open the door and step inside. The warmth greets you like recognition. The kettle hums again, faithful as heartbeat. You pour a cup, sit down, and let the quiet surround you. This is the moment the island has been leading you toward, not revelation, not triumph, just understanding. That comfort and challenge aren't opposites. They're companions. That peace doesn't arrive when difficulty ends. It arrives when you stop arguing with it. You look back through the window. Snow continues to fall, each flake unique, indifferent, perfect. Somewhere beyond the dark, glaciers creak, rivers shift, mountains wait. The island keeps living its impossible life, frozen and aflame, solitary and generous, ancient and brand new. And you, small and warm inside your borrowed shelter, whisper the words that close every Icelandic story worth telling. The cold was never the enemy. It was the teacher. You pause, then finish the thought, softly, almost to yourself. And to live here is to make peace with the impossible. Outside, the wind hears you and hushes for a moment, as if agreeing. Then it moves on, carrying your breath across the snow, folding it into the language of weather, where it will live quietly, forever, among the lessons of the land.